everybody. Okay, well, thank you very much. Welcome to the first live event of the ASPG Victorian chapter since 2019. We all know what we've been doing since then with COVID lockdown. My name is Colleen Lewis. I'm not going to speak any longer. I'm going to hand over to Miss Fiona Pattinson, the Reason Party, who's going to be our moderator for today's session. So over to you.
Thanks, Colleen. Thanks everyone, welcome. Wow. Mixed, you know, we've got people from the green side and the red side in the same room, you know. Haven't seen that for a long time. Welcome, and as Colleen said, this is our first live event for the Victorian chapter of the ASPG. And may I first start by acknowledging the Aboriginal peoples, the traditional custodians of the land, which has served as a significant meeting place of the first people of Victoria. I acknowledge and pay respect to the elders of the Aboriginal nations in Victoria, past, present and emerging, and welcome any elders and members of the Aboriginal communities who may visit or participate in the events or proceedings of the ASPG and the Parliament. And it will be interesting to see as we start going through treaty, where some of those assemblies might even sit within organisations like the ASPG. Right, today, well, I feel like I'm the old person in the room, which is like the first time I'm in my 8th year and I still feel new. You know, I don't get lost anymore, but I still feel quite new. And as Colleen said, for those who don't know me, my name is Fiona Patton and I'm a member of the Legislative Council. I represent the Northern Metropolitan Region, which is a large electorate, as my not as large as Tania's. You're quite right, Ms. Maxwell. But size doesn't matter, as we know. I can see some beautiful Northern Metropolitan people in this room today. Caroline. So I was elected at the end of 2014, so I'm just finishing up my second term, and I have to say it's an incredible privilege and honour to have been doing this, and I think, you know, if I got run over by a bus tomorrow, I would be pleased by the opportunity that this chamber has given me. And we're going to learn more about that from our newbies here today. We've got Juliana Addison, the Legislative Assembly member for Derryn, Dr. Matthew Bach from Eastern Metro, Dr. Tim Read from the Brunswick electorate, and Ms. Tania Maxwell, who represents the Northern electorate. She's in the Legislative Council as well. Now, you've all got 5 minutes, and I know you've been given a good outline of what they want to hear from you. But we'll tease out more, and if you can't fit all of that information into the 5 minutes, don't worry, we'll give you an opportunity to say more. But I will stick you to 5 minutes. I won't stick you after 5 minutes, I promise, but we will keep you to 5 minutes. So, Tania, we might start with you. Thank you, Ms. Tania Maxwell. Do you want to go there?
Oh wait, there's a microphone. Sorry.
Oh,
sorry. Sorry. I think I pushed the battery in. Yeah.
Push the battery
in. Check one.
Hey.
Thank you, Ms. Patton.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah. Yeah.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you to my colleagues for joining me, us newbies, so to speak. One of the first questions that I was asked was careers before Parliament, and I have to say that mine have been very varied and diverse. I worked on the mines in WA for many years, 12-hour days, 6 weeks on, 1 week off. I could not possibly cope with that nowadays, and thankfully the mining industry has certainly changed their rules and regulations. I also had a Native American importing retail business in WA where I would travel out through America, through all the reservations, and purchase artefacts, incredible jewellery from the artisans themselves, and I would import it all back into WA and ran my business whilst having a newborn baby. So he came to work with me every day. It was one of those areas where it took you 20 minutes to get to work and 3 hours to get home in the traffic. I also worked as a nanny for multi-millionaires in Dalkeith. So I arrived in Perth on a bus, one-way ticket in 1988, and all I had in my pocket was a name and a phone number and an address. So I turned up at this house. I came from regional New South Wales at that time. Turned up to this mansion in Dalkeith, and I had to push a button just to say who I was. There was an intercom. I'd never really experienced that before. But I did know that when you went to a restaurant and it was BYO, you didn't have to take your own glassware, whereas the two girlfriends that I travelled with asked me, do we have to take our own glasses to drink from? But being a nanny was just such an incredible opportunity for me, and I got to travel the world. I got to travel on the Concorde. And in between that, I was out working on properties where they would have New Zealanders come over and do all what they call the seeding. And then I went back to be the gardener for that very family. So my life was very, very diverse. And last but not least was really studying youth work and mental health. I love doing both of those while raising a family, working full time. And it gave me the opportunities, knowledge and skills to go on and be a youth worker.
Great, thank you. Had more time. Juliana, your 5 minutes starts now.
Thank you very much, Fiona. And thank you for emceeing today. You bring such a beautiful energy to
I was going to bring plants. I thought that would actually soften the place. We've got some space.
I had some calming plants, but I too would like to acknowledge that we meet on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I come from the lands of the Wadawurrung people. So the Wadawurrung people are the traditional owners of my electorate of Wendouree. Wendouree meaning go away or get nicked. So I am a member for Get Nicked. So if you would like the whole story, it's in my inaugural speech, but literally colonisers came over the hill, Aboriginal woman, a Wadawurrung woman said, hey, and she said Wendouree, and he said, hey, and he said Wendouree, and the rest is history. And, so I'm very proud to have a Wadawurrung word in my electorate name, and Ballarat obviously means bended elbow at home. So when you come from Ballarat and you come from Wendouree, we're really, really fortunate that we have so much rich Wadawurrung language. So it's something that as a history teacher, my former job, that I love to learn about more every day, because certainly when I went through school, I didn't have the education, I didn't know what I know now, and I'm desperate constantly to be able to share as much as I can. So I, like the rest of the panel, was elected in 2018. I was pre-selected in November 2017. So whilst I've been here for nearly 4 years, it really was one very, very busy year. Without a lot of money, trying to really raise your profile. My sitting member, Sharon Knight, was the former member for Wendouree, had decided, and she announced early, which made it a lot easier for me. She announced in July 2017 that she wasn't interested in contesting the 2018 election, and then our Labor Party processes for pre-selection really kicked in there. So I'd grown up in Ballarat. I was born in Ballarat. Mum and Dad, well, we lost Dad last year. Mum still lives in the same house that I grew up in the heart of my electorate, which is really exciting. So my primary school, everywhere I grew up, is my electorate. So that's something really special for me, that I get to represent my neighbourhood. I get to represent the friends that I play basketball with, the teachers who taught me, and they're very proud of me, as you could imagine. So representing Ballarat is really special to me, and it was interesting. I was talking to Minister Polworth a couple of sitting weeks ago, and he was talking about his pre-selection. We were comparing pre-selection notes, and he said, "You know what? I didn't want to represent anywhere else but Colac." And I said, despite being a member of the Labor Party for more than 20 years when I was pre-selected, I don't know if I would have wanted to represent a different electorate either. And I've really been reflecting on that of late, of just how lucky I am that I get to represent the city I grew up in. And I think if any of you are in the chamber, I talk about Ballarat a lot, and I love Ballarat so much. So it's really special for me to be able to represent that. Before I entered Parliament, most recently, similar to Tania, this is really my third career, being an MP. I had the wonderful opportunity to teach for 12 years. I was a teacher at Ballarat Claren College, and I got to teach history, and I got to work in the girls' boarding house, and I got to hang out with young people, and I got to teach civics, which was really, really fun. And the funnest part about it was I went to a private independent school, and it was very important for me that none of the kids knew that I was a member of the Labor Party, because I really wanted them to learn about civics and about the mechanics of civics and about governing and about legislation. And it was really important to me that I wanted to be the best teacher that I could be, and the kids would quiz me. And they'd say, "But who do you vote for, Miss Addison?" And I'd say, "You've got to guess." And I said, "There must be some clues." And they said, "Oh, well, you did say that you really loved Gough Whitlam." And I said, "But everyone loves Gough Whitlam." So, that's not necessarily a thing. And so to be able to teach about federation, and which makes me a very good tour guide at this place, that I talk about the feds moving in here and staying until 1927, and the beautiful cheque they wrote to give us the members' dining room, and that's why it's Art Deco and the rest of the place isn't. I love all that. Thanks for being a history teacher, but I'm talking too much already. So before that, I retrained when I was 31 to become a school teacher, which was amazing. But before that, I was an union official, which is a much more traditional role for a Labor MP to have. I went and I did Monash, which is a good training ground as well for good Labor MPs. I was at Monash with Jill Hennessy, I was at Monash with Daniel Andrews, I was with Monash with Will Fowles. There is a lot of us from the Monash Labor Club who are with us now in the chamber, which is very exciting. During that time I worked for Lynn Kosky, and so the annex, what was a big surprise to me? The annex was a big surprise to me because I worked in the chook shed. I then worked in the school industry.
We will revisit
And
that.
I'm going to give Tim a go now. So
We
yes,
will.
that's
Thank
it.
you, Tim. Dr. Read.
Thank you. Thanks, Julia. Thanks, Fiona. And thank you all for coming. And I'd like to meet more of you before the end of the evening, because I've always wondered who comes to these events. And I'm impressed that people are interested in this. And before I go further, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri, the traditional owners, and pay respects to their elders. So before Parliament, I was a medical student before I was a doctor, and at that time I got involved in some politics around cigarette advertising. And this dates me somewhat, because back in the 80s, Melbourne was covered in cigarette billboards, and people of a certain age won't even remember that, but there was a campaign against cigarette advertising, and it was the time of the Kane government, and it was really interesting to watch the process by which the Kane government moved to progressively dismantle cigarette advertising. And there are broader politics which continue to this day around the advertising promotion of unhealthy products. But back in the 80s, some of us would write health warnings on cigarette billboards, and I may have been arrested. It's a long time ago. As a GP, I worked in community health for a while, and then I specialised in a niche area, sexual health, and particularly sexually transmitted infections, and did research and treatment and so on. But my experience stayed with me about the promotion of unhealthy products, and how that's a major part of what goes on in our society, and how people, in fact, some of you might be going to an eating disorders function tomorrow morning, and a lot of what we eat is influenced by industry. And people talk about the nanny state, but there is another nanny, not the state, who's telling kids and teenagers what to eat and what to drink and how to gamble and all of that sort of stuff, kind of a corporate nanny. And so you can start to see the way my mind works around some of these issues. And but the thing that really propelled me to wanting to get really involved in state politics was the fact that every single day Victoria burns about 100,000 tonnes of the most polluting coal on earth, brown coal, and we kind of don't talk about it much. So that's my primary motivating factor for being here. And one of the challenges, I guess the top challenge of being an MP is that there's too many things to talk about and get involved in. Time management and being able to kind of prioritise and pick your battles is really important, and I'm not very good at that, I'll admit it. You have to say no to a lot of people and issues, and I'm not very good at that. The most rewarding part of being an MP, for me, it's been a mixture of things. It's been some of the little achievements that maybe not everybody knows about, but for example, getting to negotiate a few clauses in the pandemic legislation, including one that I'll tell everyone about because I'm proud of it, which is that people who breach those pandemic orders who have healthcare cards, and Fiona will know about this, pay a much smaller fine. So all the fines you get for whatever you get fined for, it's one size fits all, except in the pandemic legislation. And I would like that to be a precedent. In some countries, fines are charged according to how much you earn, and I think that's something that we should have here too. The other thing I've got on my list of things to talk about is one thing you wish you knew before becoming an MP and advice you would give to incoming MPs, and that's, I think I'll roll that into one. I think that a lot of what happens in the Legislative Assembly, in the lower house where I sit with Juliana not far away and behind me, I'm going to single out Susanna Sheed, because it is that essentially what happens in the lower house is the end result of conversations in other rooms. The sausage is made in some other room, and the Legislative Assembly is not the room where it happens. And so the power is elsewhere, and I feel as though at the time that makes the decisions that govern the people of Victoria are made elsewhere, and we just see the end result. And I think that there are a whole lot of reasons why the institution of Parliament is perhaps not the way it was intended to be, certainly in the lower house, because of the lack of non-government business time. And I'm singling out Susanna because she's been running a weekly campaign calling out trying to move a motion to reintroduce non-government business time, which I'm happy to support, but Susanna should get the credit. And I think that there are a number of ways in which the institution of Parliament is not respected by the media, the population, and the government, and I think that we can do better there.
Thank you, Tim. And look, you're welcome to come and visit our house and see how it really happens. But we can talk about that as we have more time. Dr. Bach.
Thanks, Fiona. But that's exactly what I was thinking, actually, as you were talking. Tim, it's fantastic to be a new member of the upper house because of the fact that, as a result of the election result last time around, obviously in the lower house, the Labor Party won a thumping majority. And yet, because of reforms, credit where credit's due, that went through under, I think, Steve Brack's premiership, it's very, very difficult for the major parties to get an outright majority in the upper house. And so it's been a wonderful learning curve to work with Tania, Fiona, any number of different crossbench members, Jacqueline Symes, to give her credit, the leader of the government in the upper house, because we do a bit of sausage making ourselves. I don't know how this analogy works, but once we've cooked it, done with it in the lower house, we do our in the other house. It's great to be here with you. Thank you for coming along. I've been really interested by the comments of others, but in particular, Juliana, yours, because there are a number of points in my background don't line up too badly with yours. Like Juliana, I was a history teacher, history and politics teacher, before coming into Parliament. And I thought your comments were really interesting about the anxiety is probably too strong a word, but the need you felt to make sure that you presented yourself in a really impartial way. And talking about your students saying to you, well, come on, tell us what you think, was I can really chime with, because I taught politics over many years, and I was never on social media, and I hate having to be on social media now, Chair, but I was never on any form of social media. and that was a great thing for me. So no student could sort of look up anything and find any comments that I'd made that might make it clear that I support one party or another. But of course, my students were desperately keen to learn. Well, come on, what do you think? And like you, there were so many things that I learned through my journey as a history teacher, especially for me, about the many wonderful elements of Victoria's Indigenous history that I just didn't know beforehand, that I think should be taught and must be taught. I've got a real bee in my bonnet about the extent to which, under both the Australian curriculum and the Victorian curriculum, we don't teach many students about the really contested and complex period of Australian history post 1788 up to about the First World War. Almost nobody does Australian history anymore. That's the VCE subject. Numbers are plummeting for a whole range of complex reasons, and I always taught the history of revolutions. So I'm part of the problem, quite frankly, because more and more kids have been moving from Australian history to the history of revolutions. There's an optional subject a bit further down, but certainly when I was a student, and I actually did history of revolutions when I was at school as well, I didn't do Australian history, and to my shame, I thought Australian history was really boring when I was at school. Did you do Australian as well, Juliana? Yeah, well, I should have done. So I think there's a challenge for all of us in here, working with our fantastic teachers to try to figure out how we reinvigorate Australian history, because I honestly think that if more and more students certainly can learn about the injustices of the past, but alongside that, about certainly the wonderful elements of Indigenous culture that again, to my shame, I've only been learning about more and more over recent years as I've taught more history and studied more myself. Well, I think that would be a great thing in propelling us forward. So I was a school teacher principally before coming into Parliament, but I always thought about wanting to stand. I did work for a time, for about a year and a half, for a fantastic member, Mary Woolridge, Liberal member, first in a lower house seat, which was then abolished. And so then she came to the upper house. And so like Juliana, I was very surprised by the amazing setup we have in the annex out the back. So the Labor members were in the chook shed in the bad old days, and the Liberal members were down in the dungeon. So Mary and Christabel and I were sort of crammed in this tiny little bluestone office, no internet. We could listen to proceedings in the House through little radios, and this was only 10 years ago. It sounds like it was in the dark ages. So that's been a big change for me. But I suppose because I did have at least some experience in here, there are elements to the way the place works that haven't necessarily been particularly surprising. What principally pushed me to think over a long period of time about putting my hand up and then ultimately doing so, just a couple of years ago, I actually didn't come in for the last election. I took Mary's seat, so she stood down in the upper house just 2.5 years ago, and I was fortunate enough through the Liberal Party process to gain pre-selection. So I came in actually in March 2020, just before the pandemic hit. And what had spurred me over a long period of time was a sense of deep gratitude. I was born into the care of the state here in Victoria under the Labor government in the early 80s that had wonderful processes. Now, lots of kids who went through experiences.
Dr. Bach.
Yes, Chair.
That's enough.
Sorry, Chair.
It was so good. No, seriously, I mean, I think to get people engaged in politics would be to listen to these really wonderful stories of, you know, these humans who are also politicians. And I really, I would have given you all a lot more time. I actually wanted to go back to revolutions and get, you know, a bit of a debate between you and Juliana on teaching revolutions, but we won't, because we will open it up to the audience here. Be nice.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm looking around the room, I don't need to say that to you. But anyway, I have. So who would like to ask the first question? Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you very much. I asked you nicely. Two people here have been history teachers, so you must understand the importance of education. Reflect on the education you had about being an MP once you were elected, and how you think that could be dramatically improved so that you understood your role a lot better and the obligations attached to your role if you had had compulsory education and training as being.
Could I ask you all, because I think it'd be interesting to hear from all of you, so could you keep your answers quite short, please? Juliana, you start.
Excellent question, thank you very much. So there's always theory and practice, isn't there? So what you read in the book, the role of the MPs, but I think Fiona really said it at the end of us, that there's this view that there's a cookie cutter and all the politicians are cut from this. And if you look around the room here, and I can see other MPs that are with us, we all have such different stories and everything like that. So I think that certainly shapes what we bring to this place. And I know the former Deputy Premier of Melbourne, the member for Albert Park, John Thwaites, is very interested in this topic in terms of educating and professional development. As teachers, we have to do a number of hours every single year to keep our registration up. And every Monday night after school, we all had professional development hours and stuff like that. So I had the privilege of participating, and I think Tim did as well, the McKinnon course out at Monash University. Were you involved in that?
Yeah.
Too. No, there was a course offered by the McKinnon Institute, for MPs to talk about ethics and values and how we work with stakeholders and everything like that. So for me, that was really worthwhile, and I think it's very easy in the chaos of sitting weeks and then being in your constituency and then back here and then ping-ponging from the Parliament and your electorate, that you actually don't often think about issues of ethics and the values and going back to basics and stuff like that. So I think it is so important, and it's something certainly, if I have the opportunity to continue to represent my electorate moving forward, is something certainly I'd like to do a lot more of in my second term, really try and become the best representative that I possibly could. So it's something I'm very committed to.
Thanks. We'll go to Tania, then Matthew, then Tim.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Juliana. It is a good question, and I'll just go back a little bit to even at school. I loathed politics most of my life. I just couldn't stand it. But I think one of the key reasons for that was politics being taught at school was always really boring. And I think that we need to make a change to how and adapt to ensure that teachers are speaking to students more about how politics affects your life personally. We don't have that connect, and I think that that's something that's missing in our education system. I know on one polling booth, a school brought their students to school to vote for the first time. And I said to them, have you made sure they're all enrolled? They hadn't even thought about that. So it just shows you that disparity in what they think they're teaching and what the kids are actually interested in and need to know. In this place, it was a bit of a shock to me, to be honest, to become a Member of Parliament. It was something, as I said, I really didn't have a yearning to ever become an MP. But I co-founded a campaign in Wangaratta after the two horrendous deaths. And when I had the campaign running, I was working full time, and I would come down to Melbourne and meet with ministers because I knew the only way to make the changes that could have prevented those deaths was to be a seat on a chair and have those conversations with ministers. In this place, I think, yes, we absolutely need to have more opportunities available to us all, but not only to us as MPs, but I think to our staff. And I think while there is great opportunity for them to learn, as Juliana said, you become so involved in your constituency work, your parliamentary work, that sometimes that just goes to the back of your thought process, and you know, another day goes by and all of a sudden we're sitting here now saying the 6 days left of Parliament. Where does that time go? So I think it's something that we could all prioritise. Just in relation...
You'll get a little more time.
Thanks, Thanks. I agree with the implication of your question that there's not much training for us. I think certainly if you're a member of a major party, like I am, then there's a real obligation on your party and your party machinery to support you as a new member. I'm very lucky because I had Mary. So I took over Mary's seat. I have a very strong, long-standing personal connection with her. I worked for her previously, and so she provided a huge amount of support to me, and I know that through our internal processes that was deemed to be the appropriate thing for me. Internally, I agree though that there could be more support here at Parliament, although, especially through that McKinnon process, and that was a really good process. I think all members of major parties could feel really comfortable because Mr. Quates was part of that. Former Labor Party member, but that's right. So, John Thwaites, very well regarded across the aisle, and Margaret Fitzherbert, a former Liberal member, again, very well regarded across the aisle. So I think because of the way that was structured, we could feel safe, and I certainly did, to go into that process. It was good. Meet members of the Labor Party, other parties, who you might otherwise have thought, these people might have two heads or hate me. Find out, like you said, Chair, we're all just people, and that was actually a very good opportunity to share and to learn. So more of that, yes, but Parliament's taking steps, which is a good thing. Parties have a role too, I think.
Thanks. Just a couple of quick comments because you've heard a bit already. So after we were elected, the clerks gave us some classes in process, which were very useful. And I would be interested to learn more about that if I was in the upper house and it was actually important. It's less useful in the lower house. It's really more, it's like learning the rules of a sport that you don't play. But in the other area, where I'm still a bit kind of vague, because I think it's sort of perceived wisdom more than anything else, is what does an MP actually do in their electorate? There don't seem to be, there aren't many rules around that. And it's probably even less well defined for upper house MPs. And I would say that we still find out a way of making ourselves useful. And perhaps it's a good thing that there aren't any rules or clear definitions. But I think it's a thing that is probably worthy of more discussion and perhaps even discussion between us and between parties.
I agree, and I think certainly the Commonwealth Women's Parliamentary Group, we try and do some training in those parliamentary conferences when we've been able to have them. And the McKinnon Institute, I was fortunate to be part of that in my term. But, I looking at the clerks thinking, well, it would certainly make their job a lot easier if we knew a little bit more. Something like that.
I'm Kaylee. You might recognise me from the Parliamentary Library, the Research and Inquiries team there. If you haven't used that service, I advise you to get on it. It's a very good service. I'm your state election coordinator for the 2022 state election. So I've been furiously taking some notes as you've been speaking, because we're currently working on an induction program for new members, staff, and members' families. So I'm keen to hear, if you can cast your minds back literally 4 years ago now, to see if there's anything practical that you can think of that would have really helped you at that time. So I've taken a few notes of what you've already mentioned. We'll be keen to know that we're looking at building an integrity and ethics component into our orientation and then induction program. And we're collaborating really closely with the House departments to ensure that we offer an integrated program that covers off a few of those key things. Some examples of some of the things we're looking at is how to set up and run an electorate office, delivering your first speech, house procedure, the meeting procedure, that sort of thing. But is there anything that comes to your mind around some of those really practical things that Parliament could offer to new members that would have really made a bit of a difference, or anything that worked really well that you'd like to see continue? Thanks.
Great question, and I think it's a little bit like Tim said. It's like being taught a sport that you sort of have no interest in, and you don't. It's superfluous at the time. So yes, we did have some fantastic introductions by the clerks for the upper house members, but I think it's a little bit overwhelming. You're taking in so much information at one time, and I think until you put it into practice, it's then that you need to come back and revisit that again. And it doesn't have to be as lengthy as your initial briefing, but I think going back, people can then go, oh, exactly, that's what that is. Because I think learning the policies and the processes and the standing orders and things, that takes time. And I remember when we were first elected, people would come and sit beside you and say, now, this is what's happening, this is what's happening. And whilst that was fantastic, that wasn't always afforded to every member in the chamber. So I think just learning those processes and policies and then revisiting it.
For me, I think constituency questions, adjournment matters, government business program, there's all these things and nobody actually sort of says to you, well, how could you use that to benefit your electorate? How can you use it to raise your profile? How do these videos work? How do you contact broadcasting? So you've got a video of you asking a question in the House. So I think I probably did not do an adjournment matter for the first 9 months because I didn't understand how powerful adjournment matters are. Like, you get to ask a minister to come to your electorate or to do an action, and that's really, really powerful. So there's these tools that we've got within the workings of the House, which really can deliver some really good outcomes for you as a backbencher. And it's probably a bit different for me being in government, and I take that up and I take that on board. But certainly no one sort of pulled me aside and said, this is how committee reports work or this, that. And I'm just going to look to my good friend and colleague, John Kennedy. Did you kind of have to find that out on your own as well?
Yeah, I had to find out a heck of a lot. That's what I need in this job.
Yeah, so I think if as a part of the inductions, you could talk about that and also the role of committees. That was something that nobody really explained to me. And committees are awesome, but I didn't sort of understand how powerful and worthwhile they could be.
Matthew, was there?
I would just quickly add that my perspective is slightly different from others. I confess, I felt really well supported as I came in, and I actually think it's a little bit different for people who come in with a casual vacancy. So certainly, Juliana says to me, who previously been staffers, yeah, I agree with that as well. So you know, there were numerous staff around Parliament who I knew from 10 years ago. So that was fantastic. I had a relationship with Mary, who had left, who supported me. But then, in addition, I think it's possible, I don't know whether this is true or not, that the induction I received was slightly different because of the fact that the various departments around this building weren't dealing with a huge influx of new people, they were just dealing with me. And so I can see people in the room, you know, Barry Carlin was amazing, Andrew, our clerk, obviously. So any number of people actively pursued me, staff the Parliamentary Library as well, in order to sit down with me, in order to help me understand what they could do for me. So that was my experience, which was amazing. I'd also say, look, there are differences between the upper and lower house. For those of us in the upper house, you watch lower house question time, and you think, how can people carry on like that? Every single day.
Never happens in our house.
Not a member in the upper house has been kicked out in the 2.5 years that I've been with. And so many members, Labor Party members, Sam Rappin, leader of the Greens, members of other minor parties, the Open Rights on committees, have been so kind to me and supportive of me, helping me understand process. Harriet Shing and I were having a discussion today. I started up a process when I was circulating an amendment. So I'm not sure if that happens regularly in the lower house. It certainly happens in our house, and that's a lovely thing. So I think with all of those elements, I confess I felt very supported, and there are still many things that I mess up, especially in terms of process. Then I know I've got Andrew and his team, I've got other members. I know that I can go to other members and confide in them how stupid I feel, and that it will never become an issue for me. So that's all actually worked relatively simply and straightforward for me.
How prepared were you for your first week or first night? Didn't you have a really long...
My first night, we actually went till, I think after 2. Yeah. And I wasn't prepared because I brought my push bike in because I hadn't got my car yet. And I was teaching at Ivanhoe, and there are excellent tracks along the river there, so I was riding my bike, so I came in and I thought I'd probably get away at a reasonable time. And then David Davis the opposition leader in the upper house gave me a lift home at about 2:30 or 3. And I thought people were kidding when they said we're going to sit till 3. You don't know.
I certainly think in the upper house, we get to use the standing orders. So there is an incentive to learn them and to get to know them and to become familiar with those processes. But I like the idea of that follow-up training, because it is a bit of a blur when you're first elected and you are really trying to find your way. But that in a week or two's time is actually probably a really good time to revisit what a constituency question is, and what the difference is between a question without notice or a question on notice, and then maybe starting to talk to us about PAYAC and some of those really important committees, SARC, those committees, so we have a better understanding of the usefulness of a SARC report or the usefulness of a PAYAC report.
Fiona?
Susanna.
I think I need to direct my question to Tania, because she's a crossbencher and I'm an independent in the lower house, and I'd just like her to talk about the things she feels she's been able to achieve because you have a non-government business program in your house. So, for instance, you can introduce private members' bills, you can move motions, you could bring on a disallowance motion, you could refer a matter to committees. All the things that in our house, the only house in the Westminster system that doesn't allow that, you've been able to do. So I just wonder if you could talk about what you feel like you've been able to achieve, by having that mechanism.
Thanks, Susanna, and I think you've answered all of that actually. Look, it is a fantastic opportunity to be able to, it's not very often that a crossbencher is able to amend legislation, but it's a damn good feeling when you can get it across the line. Of course, it's not just a matter of being able to put forward an amendment. There are so many discussions behind the scenes, so many discussions with colleagues. I mean, our staff are incredible at working with every office where possible. But as you say, Susanna, private members' bills and doing the amendments is a really great opportunity. And I actually commend you on your motion that you put up every single sitting week to be able to discuss non-government business, and I applaud you for that consistency and integrity in doing that. It'd be really good, I think, if we could enable the houses to sort of swap over on a non-sitting day and just have like a mock
I'd like that.
Andrew's going, there is no way in hell that's happening. I mean, you can go and sit in the gallery, obviously, but it's not the same as actually being involved and being able to have that sense of purpose that you've actually achieved something that can, as a crossbencher, be incredibly difficult.
Yes, Susanna.
I could go on and on.
I know you could. And if there was something we could do from the big red house, we would. But we can't change the little green house from the big red house.
Come to the dark side, Susanna.
Of course.
Thanks for coming. So if you could have a do-over, so say you were going to be coming in at the next Parliament, what's one thing that you would tell yourself to prepare yourself for this place? I know it's probably going to be really hard to narrow it down to one thing, but what advice would you give yourself to be it's going to be a lot, but it's going to be good?
That's a great question. Let's have a Tim.
So I recall, might have been my first question time. And I can't remember who it was. Oh, yes, I can. I won't say. And it was asking a question. And I thought, isn't she horrible? And I thought, and it took me a while to realise, it took me a long time to realise that it's theatre in there. And they're nice people. I wound up having a long and good discussion with this person some months later and completely, reform my opinion. But it's really quite, traumatic is too strong a word, but it really is off-putting the way people treat each other in the chamber. And I'll hold the door open for you a few minutes later outside. It messed with my head for some time. And I'm more used to it now. I'm not completely used to it, but I'm more used to it. And I think that's okay, but I do still wonder about it as a safe workplace. And while I've got this, one other little thing. The bells might ring any second. They'll be deafening, and none of us will blink an eye. We're like, shearers can have a conversation over the noise of their machinery, right? But when we've got guest speakers in here or in the library or whatever, I just think it's an insult to have those bells ringing like that. And if I had a long enough crowbar, I'd fix it. But I'm just chucking that into the room.
Yeah, okay. What, you would like a crowbar if you're re-elected? Yeah, a crowbar, okay. Matthew, any other instruments you'd like?
No, none. For me, I stressed when I first came in about internal matters. So, Juliana and I both discussed briefly our pre-selections. And, on all sides, recently decisions have been made by parties not to move forward with person X, but to go with person Y. And I stressed about that early doors, and I wish I hadn't stressed about that as much. I think I would have engaged, to take your point, Tim, a little bit differently with my colleagues in the lower house. And because when I worked as a staffer, I worked for a member of the lower house. I think in my initial period, so here's something I would have done differently, I didn't get the tone right. I think I did make changes quite quickly, but because I was used to, both in opposition and then in government, getting Mary ready for question time, which is so combative, like you say, Tim, that's what I was used to watching and seeing people engaging in that way. And I actually remember something very early doors. I was just getting to know Jacqueline, the leader of the government. She's a friend of mine, she's very good. And I stood up and I had a crack. I think I actually had a crack at Dick Wynn. I need to apologise. I didn't say something that bad. I think I made reference to his age, quite frankly, which I shouldn't have done. And it was out of order. And she stood up and she moved a point of order. And she specifically said that I shouldn't have said it, and it was very much unlike me to say it. And I felt,
She wasn't angry, she was just disappointed.
Yeah. It made an impact on me. That she was really saying to me, look, no, you're better than that, you're not like that, why don't you not behave like that? So making that switch earlier is something that I wish I'd done, but hopefully I've got the hang of it now.
Juliana.
2 points. I did the Pathways to Politics course in 2017 with Carol Schwartz, and within that cohort there were a number of Greens, a number of Liberals, women who were unaligned. And what was really drummed into us during that program was that you're not always going to deliver change by just being mates with your own side, that there are going to be times when numbers are tough and that you're going to have to go beyond the party room to get good outcomes. If you're fair income and you're here for the right reasons, there is going to be a time, probably not when we have 55 seats out of 88 in the lower house, but there is going to be a time when the numbers are really, really tight and your relationships with people are going to matter. And I think that's really how I came to the Parliament, saying every relationship matters. And I'm happy to share a story that my dad was 78 when he voted Labor for the first time. He voted for me for the first time. He was a small businessman in Ballarat, and he didn't like that I worked for trade unions, and he didn't like that I was a feminist, and he didn't like that I was hardcore. Loved me a lot, but didn't like it. And growing up in a family with this bleeding heart lefty mum and this dry conservative dad means that every argument is a contest. every debate can be won. And so my approach to politics, and particularly with my committees, and I've had the most beautiful committee with the Economy and Infrastructure Committee, these are really good people, and I'm going to learn something from every interaction that I have. So I don't know how long I'll be here, but I'm working really hard to be here again. But you just never know when the numbers are going to change. You're never going to know who an ally is, and make sure that you're in a position to be able to call on people. And saying that, Louise Staley and I share a boundary, so Ripon and Wendouree. And so Louise and I often end up in Anzac Day events, local business events, and this, that, and other thing. And it's very similar to what Tim says. Louise and I give each other so much stick. I holler at her from my spot, and she hollers back at me, and she rips shreds off me when I'm doing adjournment matters and everything like that. The moment we are back at an event, and it's normally cold and we're outside and it's freezing, we chat away together and ask how our week's been and what's going on with you. So I'm just a big believer in you're never going to know. I'm not a hater. I'm a lover, not a fighter. You never know when you're going to need someone. It's on video now. So just always be respectful, because things will change and we won't always have a 55-seat majority.
Tania, what would you do over?
Look, I think before coming into Parliament, I certainly would have probably read a lot more of Hansard and worked out some of the processes first, and legislation, etc. Nothing like a good old second reading in the Legislative Assembly. But I think coming into Parliament, I think Juliana's absolutely right. We need to treat each other as human beings with respect. We may have completely different ideologies, but at the end of the day, we are all people here wanting to do the best we can, not only for our colleagues, our constituents, but I really believe for each other. And I think that that's something that MPs all need to uphold and hold themselves in good steam ethically, morally, and to ensure that we continue to always respect each other. And I think getting to know each other too can make a big difference.
I actually think that's a beautiful point to end on. But I'm actually I know it's not in the rule, it's not in the list, but
Go for your life.
I just think that question of what you think an MP should know. Andrew, you're about to go on to start another career away from us. Who knows? You might become a beekeeper, which probably easier than managing the cats that you're herding at the moment. But is it, as someone who has seen new members of Parliament come through, not just here but in WA, is there something that you would say you would love to see us all learn before we got here?
That's how long you got.
30 seconds.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, get the mic.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, and I'll try not to get on my soapbox because perhaps this is going to overlap a little bit with what Susanna has mentioned. I've had 25 years of exposure to parliaments, and I think one of the things I'd love to see is a greater sense that members, particularly from the major parties who get elected, value being a member. Now, very clearly from listening to Juliana and Matthew, it's very clear how much they value their local constituencies and their role. My concern is that it's just an emphasis on, unless I'm in government, I'm not really a player. And I think that's something that is perhaps because there's less understanding perhaps of Parliament. We've got a civic education issue, of course, in Australia. I think if people had a greater sense of understanding what Parliament is, separate from the government, and what you can actually achieve, that would be a great start. But that's a massive exercise in cultural change, and it's not peculiar to this Parliament, but it's not a peculiarly Australian problem, but it is, I think, a bit worse in Australia than other Westminster parliamentary systems, for whatever reason.
Well, Susanna pointed out one reason: no government business in the lower house.
Yeah, that's perhaps a symptom. of another issue. So I look, there's no easy answer to that, but that is something which is a slight disappointment to me as I exit the Parliament compared to what I remember from many years ago. I think what we've seen tonight is for parliamentarians, which is fantastic, as opposed to just for politicians. And I'd love there to be more parliamentarians.
Thank you, Andrew. I think absolutely. And kudos to the four of you. You've really provided some really beautiful insight, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'll hand over to our interim president, Colleen, for the final words. Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you all very much. That was a fabulous session. I learned so much. I'm sure everybody else did. And I kept on sitting there thinking, oh, only this is what question time was like. And I mean that quite sincerely. If only the person, the values that you all expressed that could be expressed, and the public could see it. I am just absolutely convinced that trust in our members of Parliament would skyrocket. And I don't know how we can make this happen, but it's something to think about as a researcher who does researching to do with parliaments. But to you all, thank you so much for your time. I know how busy you are. So I'm just going to be very informal. So to Juliana, Matthew, Tania and Tim, on behalf of everybody, thank you very much for your contribution. And to our moderator, Fiona, who I can remember very clearly sitting here 4 years ago as one of the panel members, and it was beautifully moderated. Thank you so much. Done with humour. I think it set the tone. You have a lovely way of telling people to move on and get But thank you all very much too for coming, and I so look forward to seeing you all at every single other ASPG event. So thank you.
Thank you.